The sepia-toned photograph sits in the center of Professor Eleanor Wright's desk, its edges frayed and yellowed with age. The image shows 17 children arranged in 3 rows in front of a stern Victorian building. Their expressions are solemn, eyes staring directly into the camera, all except for one, a small girl in the back row, her face partially obscured by shadow. This photograph has been sitting in the university archives for decades, Eleanor explains, adjusting her glasses as she leans toward the camera. Taken at the Blackwood Orphan Asylum in 1899, it's one of the few surviving records of the institution. Eleanor is not just any professor. As head of historical photography analysis at Cambridge, she spent her career studying images that others have overlooked, finding stories hidden within the faded details of forgotten photographs. But this particular image has consumed her attention for the past 3 months. What began as routine cataloging quickly became something else entirely, she says, her voice dropping slightly. There's something about these children, something in this photograph that doesn't quite make sense. The camera pans across Eleanor's office, walls lined with bookshelves, antique cameras displayed on stands, and multiple computer monitors showing various sections of the photograph, enlarged and enhanced. Technology allows us to see details that would have been impossible to detect even 20 years ago, she continues. Digital enhancement reveals elements that were invisible to the naked eye. And what we've found, she pauses, glancing at the original photograph. What we've found has left even the most skeptical members of my team deeply unsettled. Her assistant, Dr. James Chen, enters the frame, carrying a folder of documents. The Blackwood Asylum operated from 1873 until 1901, when a fire destroyed most of the building, he explains. According to records, this photograph was taken in September 1899, approximately 14 months before the fire. Eleanor nods. The photograph came to us labeled simply, Blackwood Children, Autumn 1899. No photographer credit, no names of the children, just the date and location. James opens the folder, revealing newspaper clippings from the turn of the century. Blackwood wasn't known for its humane conditions. There were rumors of mistreatment, unusual practices. Nothing was ever proven, but local newspapers occasionally questioned what was happening behind those walls. Eleanor gestures to one of her monitors. We began by running standard enhancement protocols, increasing contrast, sharpening details, examining the background elements. Nothing unusual at first. On screen, the photograph transforms from a faded sepia image to a clearer, more defined picture. The children's faces become more distinct, their clothing more detailed. These children range in age from approximately 5 to 14 years old, Eleanor continues. Their clothing is typical for institutionalized children of the period. Simple, uniform, designed for practicality rather than comfort. James points to the building behind them. The architecture is consistent with other asylums and orphanages of the Victorian era. Imposing, institutional, meant to convey authority and structure. Eleanor turns to another monitor. It was when we began examining the children themselves that we noticed the first anomalies. The screen shows an enlarged image of the children's faces, one by one. Look at their eyes, Eleanor says quietly. In photography from this period, subjects often appear to have a vacant stare due to the long exposure times required. But these children, their expressions are different. There's a uniformity that's unsettling. James nods. 16 of the 17 children have identical expressions. The same angle of the head, same set of the mouth, same gaze. It's as if they were posed, Eleanor finishes, but not in the way Victorian photography typically posed subjects. This is something else. She points to the small girl in the back row, the one whose face is partially obscured, except for her. Subject 17, as we've been calling her. She's the anomaly. The camera zooms in on the girl's partially shadowed face. At first, we thought the shadow was just a photographic artifact, a quirk of lighting or development, Eleanor explains. But when we enhance this section, on screen, the girl's face gradually becomes clearer as digital filters remove the shadow. But instead of revealing normal features, something disturbing emerges. Her eyes appear too dark, too hollow. Her expression is not blank like the others, but seems to contain something like awareness or warning. We sent this section to colleagues at MIT for independent analysis. James says, they confirmed our findings. The shadow isn't a photographic anomaly. It appears to have been deliberately placed, either during the photograph's taking or in its development. Eleanor turns to the camera. Someone wanted to hide this girl's face. The question is, why? The scene shifts to a different day. Eleanor sits with an elderly man in a cluttered office filled with historical documents. This is Dr. Harold Marsden, former curator of the Regional Historical Society. Eleanor introduces him. He's been helping us piece together the history of Blackwood Asylum. Dr. Marsden nods, his weathered hands carefully turning the pages of an old ledger. Blackwood operated under the direction of Dr. Augustus Pierce from its founding until 1897, when control passed to his son, Theodore Pierce. He points to a faded photograph of a stern-looking man with a thick beard and penetrating eyes. Augustus Pierce was considered progressive for his time. He believed orphaned children could be rehabilitated through strict routine, education, and what he called moral cultivation. Eleanor leans forward. And his son? Dr. Marsden's expression darkens. Theodore was different. Where the father saw rehabilitation, the son saw opportunity for experimentation. He had unusual ideas about child development, about the nature of the human mind. He shows them a page from a medical journal dated 1898. Theodore published several papers theorizing that children, particularly orphaned children without parental bonds, could be conditioned to develop what he called heightened perception. What did he mean by that? James asks. He was vague in his published work, Dr. Marsden replies, but his private correspondence, what little survives, suggests he believed children could be trained to perceive aspects of reality that adults had lost the ability to see. Eleanor exchanges a glance with James. When was this photograph taken in relation to Theodore's tenure? 2 years after he took control, Dr. Marsden answers. By this point, according to local newspaper accounts, strange occurrences were being reported around Blackwood. Children seen standing motionless in windows for hours. Unusual sounds at night. Several staff members resigned without explanation. The scene returns to Eleanor's office. Night has fallen, and she's alone, staring at the enlarged photograph on her monitor. I kept coming back to subject 17, her voiceover explains. There was something about her that seemed to be the key to understanding the photograph. She zooms in further on the girl's face, adjusting settings, applying new filters. Modern software allows us to reconstruct facial features based on partial images. It's not perfect, but it can give us an approximation of what might have been hidden by that shadow. On screen, the girl's face slowly reconstructs. As it does, Eleanor's expression changes from concentration to shock. She quickly saves the image and steps back from her desk. The next morning, Eleanor meets with James and 2 new experts, Dr. Sarah Patel, a forensic anthropologist, and Professor Marcus Williams, an expert in Victorian-era photography. I need you all to look at what I found, Eleanor says, her voice tense. She brings up the reconstructed image of subject 17. The others lean in, expressions shifting from curiosity to confusion to concern. That can't be right, Professor Williams says, adjusting his glasses. The facial structure is wrong, not just unusual but anatomically incorrect. Dr. Patel nods slowly. The orbital cavities, the eye sockets, are too deep and angled incorrectly, and the zygomatic bones are almost non-existent. This doesn't align with any human facial structure I've ever studied. Could it be a photographic distortion? James asks. Some kind of double exposure or manipulation? Professor Williams shakes his head. I've studied thousands of Victorian photographs, including many known to be manipulated or doctored. This doesn't match any known technique from the period. Eleanor pulls out another folder. I did some research on Theodore Pierce's theories. His unpublished notes contain references to what he called the threshold of perception. He believed that children, especially those who had experienced trauma, existed in a state between worlds. Between worlds? James repeats skeptically. His words, not mine. Eleanor clarifies. He wrote that orphaned children, having experienced the boundary between life and death through their losses, were more attuned to other planes of existence. Dr. Patel frowns. That sounds like pseudoscientific spiritualism, which was common in the Victorian era. It was, Eleanor agrees. But Pierce took it further. He developed techniques he claimed would enhance this ability. Sensory deprivation, hypnotic suggestion, and something he referred to only as the viewing. The room falls silent as they all look back at the reconstructed face of subject 17. I think we need to examine the other children more closely, James finally says. Over the next several days, the team meticulously analyzes each child in the photograph. They create enhanced images of each face, study clothing details, body positioning, and background elements. The results are consistent, Eleanor explains, as the camera shows a wall now covered with enlarged images of each child. 16 of the 17 children show subtle abnormalities that weren't apparent in the original photograph. Pupils that are slightly too large, fingers that are a fraction too long, shadows that fall at impossible angles. Professor Williams points to several of the images. Look at the way light interacts with their forms. In a normal photograph, light creates consistent shadows based on its source. But here, he traces several inconsistent shadow patterns. It's as if each child is being illuminated from a different direction. Or, Dr. Patel suggests quietly, as if they're not fully present in the same physical space. Eleanor nods. And then there's this. She brings up an enhanced image of the entire photograph, now processed to reveal details in the darkest areas. Behind the children, barely visible in the shadows of the building's entrance, stands a figure. Tall, indistinct, its proportions subtly wrong, too elongated, too thin to be human, yet clearly watching over the children. This figure doesn't appear in the original photograph to the naked eye, Eleanor explains. It's only visible under extreme enhancement, and based on its position and the lighting, it should have cast a shadow on the wall behind it, but it doesn't. What about the photographer? James asks. Do we know who took this picture? Professor Williams shakes his head. No photographer is credited, but I've been researching Blackwood's records. They employed a man named Joseph Fleming as their official photographer from 1897 to 1900. And? Eleanor prompts. And Joseph Fleming was found dead in his darkroom 3 weeks after this photograph was taken. Professor Williams says grimly. According to the coroner's report, he died of heart failure, but a local newspaper quoted his assistant saying that Fleming had been acting strangely after developing photographs from Blackwood. He reportedly refused to sleep in darkness and kept repeating that they were coming through. The atmosphere in the room grows heavy. I think, Eleanor says slowly, we need to find out what happened to these children. The research takes them deeper into archives, old newspaper records, cemetery logs. Days turn into weeks as they piece together the fates of the children in the photograph. Most of the children remained at Blackwood until the fire in 1901, James explains, pinning notes beside each child's image on their research wall. According to official records, 14 children died in that fire. 14 of the 17 in our photograph, Eleanor notes. Yes, James confirms. The official report blamed faulty wiring, but there were inconsistencies in the testimony. Several witnesses reported that the fire appeared to start in multiple locations simultaneously, and the night watchman claimed he heard the children singing minutes before the fire was discovered, though it was well past midnight. Dr. Patel returns from the county records office with additional files. I found death certificates for 12 of the 14, she says. Cause of death listed as smoke inhalation or burns, but 2 children's remains were never recovered. And the 3 who weren't at Blackwood during the fire? Eleanor asks. James points to 3 photographs on their wall. Subject 4, Timothy Hayes, was adopted 2 months after this photograph was taken. Subject 9, Elizabeth Collier, was transferred to another institution in December 1900. And Subject 17, the girl whose face was obscured, there's no record of what happened to her. According to Blackwood's ledger, she's listed only as no longer in residence as of October 1899. 1 month after the photograph was taken, Eleanor notes. Professor Williams clears his throat. I found something about Theodore Pierce. He opens an old newspaper. He wasn't present during the fire. He had been committed to Holloway Sanatorium 2 months earlier, in December 1900. Committed? Dr. Patel asks. On what grounds? Acute mania and delusions, Professor Williams reads. According to the admitting physician's notes, Pierce was found in the Blackwood basement, surrounded by photographic equipment and mirrors. He was in a state of extreme agitation, claiming that they were coming through the glass and that she had shown them the way. Eleanor sits down heavily. She had shown them the way, she repeats. Subject 17. The team falls silent, looking at the wall of children's faces and the strange, elongated figure lurking in the background. I think, Eleanor finally says, we need to find out what happened to the survivors. The search narrows to the 3 children who weren't present during the fire. Timothy Hayes, the adopted boy, proves difficult to trace. Elizabeth Collier, transferred to another institution, apparently lived to adulthood but was institutionalized for most of her life, dying in a psychiatric hospital in 1956. Her medical records cite chronic hallucinations, Dr. Patel explains. She consistently reported seeing the same 16 children throughout her life, standing at the foot of her bed, asking her to join them on the other side. And subject 17? Eleanor asks. James shakes his head. Still no trace. No name, no transfer record, no death certificate. It's as if she simply vanished. Eleanor turns back to the original photograph. What if we've been looking at this all wrong? She says slowly. What if the anomaly isn't subject 17, but the other 16 children? A new approach takes shape. The team begins researching Theodore Pierce's experiments more thoroughly, diving into his partially destroyed journals recovered after the fire. Pierce's theories evolved over time, Eleanor explains, reading from her notes. He initially believed that children could be trained to perceive other realities, but by 1899, he had become convinced that they could do more than perceive. They could interact with and potentially cross into these other planes. Professor Williams nods. His later journal entries become increasingly erratic. He writes about thinning the veil and opening the door, and he mentions one child in particular, a girl he refers to only as the catalyst. Subject 17, James suggests. Most likely, Eleanor agrees. He writes that she was different from the moment she arrived, and that she could already see them waiting on the other side. Dr. Patel leans forward. See who? Eleanor meets her gaze. He doesn't specify. He only writes that they were ancient and hungry, and that they promised knowledge in exchange for passage. The research continues, with the team diving deeper into records surrounding Blackwood Asylum and Theodore Pierce's experiments. They discover that Pierce had been corresponding with fringe occultists and spiritualists across Europe, and had acquired artifacts and texts related to ancient belief systems that predated Christianity. He was attempting to merge Victorian pseudoscience with much older traditions, Professor Williams explains. Beliefs about entities that exist just beyond human perception, separated by what many cultures called the veil, or the membrane. Eleanor nods. And he believed orphaned children were naturally closer to this boundary because of their proximity to loss and death. But what does this have to do with the photograph? James asks. How does capturing an image relate to these theories? Professor Williams's expression grows grave. In many cultures, mirrors and reflective surfaces were believed to be portals or gateways. Photography in the 19th century was often viewed with superstition, the idea that capturing someone's image could capture part of their soul. Pierce took this literally, Eleanor continues. His later journals suggest he had developed a process he believed would allow these entities to cross over, using photographic plates as the medium of transfer. That's why the children look wrong in the enhanced images, Dr. Patel says slowly, because by the time this photograph was taken, they weren't entirely human anymore, Eleanor finishes. Or they weren't entirely here. The implications hang heavily in the room. But subject 17 is different, James points out. If Pierce's writings are to be believed, she could already perceive these entities. Maybe she wasn't part of the experiment. Maybe she was trying to warn someone. Eleanor turns to the reconstructed image of subject 17's face. Or maybe she was trying to hide. The investigation takes another turn when Professor Williams discovers a reference to Timothy Hayes, the boy who was adopted shortly after the photograph was taken. According to this newspaper article from 1920, a man named Timothy Hayes returned to the county to purchase the land where Blackwood Asylum once stood, he explains. He built a house there but never lived in it. It remained empty until his death in 1947. Did he have any descendants? Eleanor asks. One daughter, Professor Williams confirms, Margaret Hayes Sullivan, and according to public records, she's still alive, 92 years old, living in a nursing home about 30 miles from here. The next day, Eleanor and James visit Sunnyside Care Home, where they're led to a sunlit room. Margaret Sullivan sits by the window, her white hair neatly arranged, her eyes clear and alert despite her age. You're here about the photograph, she says before they can introduce themselves. Father said someone would come eventually. Eleanor tries to hide her surprise. Yes, Mrs. Sullivan. We're researching a photograph taken at Blackwood Asylum in 1899. Your father was there as a child. Margaret nods. He was adopted just after that photograph was taken. He said it saved his life. She looks out the window. Father never spoke much about Blackwood, but he had nightmares until the day he died. And he kept the girl's journal all those years. The girl's journal? James asks, exchanging a glance with Eleanor. Yes, Margaret says. The one who helped him escape. He called her his guardian angel, though he said she was nothing like the angels in church windows. She smiles faintly. He said she saw what was coming through from the other side and helped him get away before it was too late. Do you still have this journal? Eleanor asks, her heart racing. Margaret nods. Father left instructions that it should be kept safe, but that if anyone ever came asking specifically about the Blackwood photograph, I should give it to them. She looks directly at Eleanor. He said whoever came would have seen her face by then and would need to know the truth. From beside her chair, Margaret retrieves a small wooden box. Inside is a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed and brittle with age. Her name was Ada, Margaret says, handing the journal to Eleanor. Ada Mills, though Father said that wasn't her real name. He said she had many names, in many times. Back at the university, the team carefully examines the journal. Written in a child's handwriting that grows increasingly mature and controlled over its pages, it tells the story of Ada Mills, orphaned at age 6 in 1897 and brought to Blackwood Asylum. She writes that she could always see the others, as she calls them. Eleanor explains, carefully turning the pages. Entities that existed alongside our world, but remained unseen by most people. A child's imagination coping with trauma, Dr. Patel suggests. Perhaps, Eleanor acknowledges. But listen to this entry from June 1899. Dr. Pierce has found a way to make the others see them too. He uses the silver mirrors and the dark water and the electric lights. The children stare until their eyes change. First they see, then they hear, then they start to change themselves. But they don't understand what they're becoming. James leans forward. What does she mean, they start to change? Eleanor turns to another page. September 1899. Today they took our photograph. I tried to turn away to hide my face. I know what happens when they capture your image now. It's how they start to pull you through. The others have almost crossed over. Sometimes I can see right through them, like they're made of fog. They don't talk to me anymore. They only whisper to each other in the voice that hurts my ears. Professor Williams rubs his forehead. This aligns with Pierce's theories. He believed the photographic process could be modified to thin the boundary between worlds. There's more, Eleanor says, turning to a later entry. October 1899. I'm leaving tonight. I've convinced Timothy to come with me. He's the only one who still has enough of himself left. The others are too far gone. When they sleep, they're already on the other side. Dr. Pierce doesn't understand what he's done. He thinks he's opening a door, but he's really opening himself. They're going to wear the children like clothes and walk through into our world. The room falls silent. The final entry is from years later. Eleanor continues. The handwriting is mature, an adult's script. I've spent my life watching for signs of them coming through elsewhere. The fire at Blackwood may have destroyed that gateway, but there will be others. There are always those who look too deeply into the spaces between worlds. I leave this record so that those who find it might recognize the signs. Look to the children. They see first, they change first, and by the time adults notice, it's often too late. Dr. Patel looks troubled. This is either the elaborate fantasy of a traumatized child who grew into a disturbed adult, or Ada Mills was telling the truth about what she witnessed at Blackwood, Eleanor finishes. James shakes his head. But this is impossible. People don't just change into something else, and entities from another plane of existence don't cross over through photographs. Perhaps not literally, Professor Williams says. But what if Pierce's experiments had psychological effects? What if he was essentially brainwashing these children using photography and suggestion to alter their perception of reality? That doesn't explain the anomalies in the photograph, Eleanor points out. The physical inconsistencies we've documented. The debate continues late into the night, with the team divided on how to interpret their findings. Eventually, they agree to sleep on it and reconvene in the morning. That night, alone in her office, Eleanor continues studying the photograph. She applies a new enhancement algorithm, designed to detect minute differences in depth and dimension. What she sees makes her blood run cold. The next morning, the team finds Eleanor still in her office, surrounded by new printouts, and looking as if she hasn't slept. I need to show you something, she says without preamble. This is the photograph processed through a dimensional analysis algorithm. It measures subtle variations in depth that the human eye can't detect. On screen, the photograph has transformed into a strange, layered image. 16 of the children appear to be simultaneously in front of and behind the physical space they occupy. Their forms bleed outward, creating ghost-like extensions that reach toward the camera. Only subject 17, Ada, appears solid and singular in her position. That's not all, Eleanor continues, bringing up another enhanced section. Look at the windows of the building behind them. In the darkened glass of Blackwood Asylum's windows, reflections are visible, but they don't match the children standing in front of the building. Instead, they show twisted, elongated forms reaching toward the glass from inside. According to Ada's journal, Eleanor says quietly, by the time this photograph was taken, the children were already partially transformed, already partially elsewhere. Professor Williams examines the enhanced windows. These reflections shouldn't be visible at this angle. It's photographically impossible. Unless, James suggests, what we're seeing isn't a reflection, but something on the other side of the glass, looking out. Dr. Patel, who has been quiet, finally speaks. The fire. If Ada's account is to be believed, and these entities were using the children as vessels to cross over, what happened after she and Timothy escaped? Eleanor turns to the last pages of Ada's journal. She writes that she tried to warn others, but no one would listen. She returned to Blackwood on the night of the fire. She doesn't explicitly state that she started it, but she writes, I did what was necessary. The gateway had to be closed, even if it meant ash and ember. May they find peace in whatever realm they now reside. The team sits in silence, contemplating the implications. What happened to Ada after that? James finally asks. Eleanor turns to the very last page of the journal. She writes that she dedicated her life to watching for signs of similar attempts at crossing over. She traveled widely, investigating reports of strange phenomena involving children. Her last entry is dated 1967. She would have been in her 70s. And after that, Dr. Patel prompts. Nothing, Eleanor says. The journal ends. We don't know what became of her. Professor Williams clears his throat. I think perhaps we should consider what to do with our findings. This story, if released to the public, would sound incredible, James finishes. Unbelievable. Not necessarily, Eleanor says. We have documented evidence of anomalies in the photograph. We have historical records of Theodore Pierce's research and commitment to an asylum. We have Ada's journal and Timothy Hayes's testimony through his daughter. But the interpretation of that evidence, Dr. Patel begins, can remain open, Eleanor suggests. We present what we've found. The analysis of the photograph, the historical context, the journal. We let others draw their own conclusions. The team eventually agrees, deciding to prepare their findings for publication in an academic journal with appropriate caveats and multiple interpretations offered. As they pack up their materials, Professor Williams pauses, looking troubled. What is it? Eleanor asks. I was just thinking about what Ada wrote, that there would be others who looked too deeply into the spaces between worlds. He glances at the photograph, still displayed on Eleanor's monitor. In a way, isn't that what we've been doing? Looking too deeply? Eleanor considers this. Perhaps. But Ada also left her journal to be found. She wanted people to know what happened at Blackwood. As a warning, James adds quietly. The following week, as Eleanor finalizes their report, she receives an unexpected visitor. An elderly gentleman in a tweed jacket introduces himself as Dr. Thomas Reed, a former colleague of Dr. Harold Marsden. Harold mentioned you were researching the Blackwood photograph, he explains. I thought you might be interested in this. He places a manila envelope on her desk. Inside is another photograph, this one dated 1965, showing a group of researchers at a symposium on paranormal phenomena. Third from the left, Dr. Reed says, pointing. Eleanor examines the figure, a woman in her 70s, with striking eyes and a serious expression. Despite her age, there's something familiar about her face. Is this? Eleanor begins. Ada Mills, Dr. Reed confirms, though she was using the name Helen Clark by then. I met her at that symposium. She was formidable, intensely knowledgeable about folklore related to entities that exist at the edge of human perception. Eleanor stares at the image of the elderly Ada, trying to reconcile it with the hidden face of the child in the Blackwood photograph. She approached me after my presentation. Dr. Reed continues. Told me I was asking the right questions but looking in the wrong places. Said that the boundaries were thinnest around those who had experienced profound loss or trauma, particularly children. She dedicated her life to protecting such children from Exploitation. Did she mention Blackwood? Eleanor asks. Dr. Reed shakes his head. Not specifically, but she did say something that has stayed with me all these years. She said, "The camera doesn't just capture light, Dr. Reed. It captures possibility. What might be. What waits to be. Be careful what you look for in the shadows of old photographs. Sometimes, looking is enough to invite them in." A chill runs down Eleanor's spine. She glances at her computer monitors where dozens of enhanced sections of the Blackwood photograph are still displayed. "Thank you for sharing this," she says to Dr. Reed. "May I keep this photograph?" "Of course," he replies. "That's why I brought it. I thought it might help complete your research." He pauses at the door, though some mysteries are perhaps better left unsolved. After he leaves, Eleanor sits alone in her office, looking at the two photographs side by side, the Blackwood children of 1899 and the elderly Ada Mills in 1965, the girl who saw something coming through and spent her life making sure it didn't happen again. Eleanor's phone rings, startling her. It's James. "You need to come to the lab," he says, his voice tense. Something's happened to the original photograph. 20 minutes later, Eleanor stands in the university's preservation lab, staring at the Blackwood photograph in its protective case. The photograph that had started their investigation months ago. "I was preparing it for return to the archives," James explains, "when I noticed this." He points to the back row of children. Where subject 17, Ada, had stood, there is now only empty space. Her figure has vanished from the photograph entirely. "That's not possible," Eleanor whispers. "Photographs don't just change." Professor Williams examines the photograph with a magnifying glass. The paper hasn't been tampered with. There's no sign of alteration. Could it have been a different photograph all along? Dr. Patel suggests. One that looked similar but didn't include her? Eleanor shakes her head. "We have hundreds of scans and digital copies showing her presence. All our research, all our enhancements." She rushes to a computer and pulls up their digital archives. Image after image appears on screen, all showing the Blackwood photograph as they had originally found it, with Ada partially hidden in shadow in the back row. "This doesn't make sense," James says, looking between the physical photograph and the digital copies. Eleanor remembers Dr. Reed's words. "The camera doesn't just capture light, it captures possibility." "What if," she says slowly, "by finding Ada, by uncovering her story, we somehow completed something, closed a circle?" The others look skeptical, but no one offers a better explanation for the impossible change in the photograph. In the weeks that follow, the team completes their research paper, documenting their findings about Blackwood Asylum, Theodore Pierce's experiments, and the anomalies they discovered in the photograph. They include Ada's journal and the testimony of Timothy Hayes through his daughter, but they make no mention of Ada's disappearance from the original photograph. Some things, they silently agree, are better left undocumented. The night before their paper is submitted for publication, Eleanor works late in her office. As she's about to leave, she notices something on her monitor. The dimensional analysis of the photograph is still open, showing the strange layered image of the children both present and elsewhere. But something has changed. The twisted, elongated forms visible in the windows of Blackwood Asylum are no longer contained behind the glass. In this enhanced version, they now extend slightly beyond the windows, reaching outward. As if, over the months that Eleanor and her team have been studying them, they've moved closer to the boundary. Eleanor quickly closes the file without saving and shuts down her computer. Some doors, once noticed, are perhaps better left unwatched. The next morning, she submits their paper. Its conclusion is appropriately academic and measured, offering multiple interpretations of their findings and calling for further research into the photographic techniques of the late Victorian era and their potential for creating optical anomalies. The final paragraph, however, Eleanor writes herself, "Perhaps the most enduring mystery of the Blackwood photograph is not what it shows us, but what it suggests about the nature of perception itself. In an age where we can digitally enhance and manipulate images to reveal hidden details, we must ask ourselves, are we uncovering what was always there, or are we sometimes creating new possibilities through the very act of looking?" As Ada Mills wrote in her journal, "The veil between worlds is thinner than we think, and sometimes attention itself is enough to tear it." 6 months later, Eleanor receives an envelope with no return address. Inside is a small faded photograph she's never seen before. It shows a young woman in early 20th century clothing, standing beside a teenage boy, Ada Mills and Timothy Hayes, she realizes, after their escape from Blackwood. On the back, in faded ink, is written, "Remember, looking invites." Some photographs are meant to stay in shadow. Eleanor places the photograph in a sealed envelope, writes, "Blackwood, Ada Mills" on the front, and locks it in her desk drawer. Some mysteries, she decides, have answered enough questions. Some photographs have revealed enough secrets. But that night, as she sleeps, her computer monitor flickers to life without being touched. On screen, the Blackwood photograph appears, zooming slowly inward on the windows of the asylum. Behind the glass, elongated forms press against the boundary, their features becoming clearer as the image enhances itself. And for just a moment, before the screen goes dark again, one of them looks directly into Eleanor's empty office, as if seeing across time and space, watching for anyone who might be watching back.